Mmm.
Hi, and welcome back to Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. Tonight is another special episode of Hot Off the Press for Double Feature. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, so let's go around. Wally, do you want to give a quick intro?
Hi, I am Wally Quigley. I write under the name WP Quigley to maximize my pretentiousness before anyone reads a page. I am the founder and one of the directors of Ascendent Publishing, the entity responsible for Double Feature magazine. Double Feature started in December of 2022. Well, the idea hatched then anyways. Our first issue debuted in January of 2023. And since then, we've put out 5 regular, just standard issues and whatnot. And then last year, we decided to do an annual issue, which was kind of like a double-sized, fully jammed with stories issue that had 9 tales that were based along the Grand Guignol, the infamous French theater that existed in its heyday in the early 20th century. That annual issue was a surprise and kind of a breakout success for us. So naturally, we decided that we were going to do a second annual, and continuing along the theme of exploring the B-level horror camp science fiction fare that other cultures had to offer, with Grand Guignol obviously being France, we decided to shift our focus to the UK this year, and specifically Hammer Studios and Hammer Films, all those great movies that had actors like Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and Vincent Price and Carolyn Monroe and so on and so forth. So that is what we're here for today, to promote that particular issue and promote these wonderful authors that I have recruited into contributing for this issue.
So, Mr. Vernon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. Yep. So I'm D.S. Vernon. I've been writing with Ascendant and Double Feature for pushing 2 years now. I was in that Grand Guignol episode, and that one I wrote a story called Dumpster Fire. And this time I'm back around with the immortal Dr. Fives.
Tony?
I'm Tony Harrington. I write under Anthony Harrington because, like Wally, I want to be as pretentious as possible. I write horror comedies. It's a niche thing, but it's my jam. This is my first round with Ascendant and Double Feature, and I hope I do them proud. But that's pretty much it for me.
John?
Hey, I'm Don McColley, and I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror all over the place. I first worked with Wally on Double Feature and also in the first annual. And you can see kind of in the background, I have the image of the Nighthawks by Ed Hopper from back in the day, and my story was based on that in the first annual. And in this annual, I went with The Inheritance, which is about this woman who's basically a mad scientist who goes nuts with plants and trying to manipulate them and create things and use that science to revive her husband. But it obviously goes off the rails, and it's all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, we'll dive into that here in just a minute.
Yeah.
So, Wally, what kind of inspired the theme for going with Hammer Films? We actually have done a number of shows over the years on Hammer Films, Hammer Studios. Know a few of the people that worked with them back in the heyday. So, what kind of pulled you towards Hammer Studios?
Well, the first imperative, or the first kind of drive that pushed us towards doing something with Hammer, was the fact that we had selected, like was mentioned, Grand Guignol Theater in turn of the century France for the first annual. So in that regard, it made sense to explore the not A-level horror and science fiction entertainment fare that another country had to offer. And so there were a couple choices that immediately came to mind. But in the end, in choosing Hammer Studios and Hammer Films, it was really kind of directed towards capturing that experience that I think that most of us had, at least in our generation, of watching, Christopher Lee on the big screen or on like a VCR tape or whatever as Dracula, or Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, seeing Vincent Price completely hammered up as Dr. Phibes, and then some of the other more lurid type of movies where you have like these sexy vampires that are revealing a lot but not all, and just enough to titillate the young 14, 15-year-old minds that were exposed to it. It offered another kind of dimension to the idea and the concept behind double feature, wherein with Grand Guignol, that content was based on stage and live performance where there was an audience, and the plots and narratives and characters and how these things were constructed were geared towards eliciting an immediate response from audiences that were 10 and 15 and 20 feet away. Whereas Hammer Studios was designed and kind of constructed around the idea of like going to the cinema and seeing these movies in a larger than life presentation on a flat screen, where these actors and actresses became as much the star and the kind of the flavor of whatever movie you were expecting to see for that evening as the actual stories themselves. So whereas Hammer Studios was kind of famous for, in the early 70s with the number of Dracula and Frankenstein and Wolfman, all those kind of standards that have been established in American cinema in the 40s and 50s and so on and so forth, Hammer Studios kind of brought it to another level, especially with the emerging technologies of, I think it's like Panavision or whatever kind of color film that they were using seemed to bring everything out in a kind of visual hyperbole, if you will. So even like now in 2024, watching those movies, they hold a special place, not just in my heart, but in all of our hearts. And they form the basis for a lot of the genre of cinema these days. They take a lot of the directorial cues, if you will, like a lot of the camera angles and such, the over-exaggerated close-ups and zoom-ins and the sinister evil lurking just around the corner, but also that kind of like big flourish at the end where in the last 10 or 15 minutes it's really when the antagonist or the evil that's present in whatever movie is being watched really kind of unfolds their big master dastardly plan. And it just really kind of was intuitive from there. And yeah, everybody was super enthusiastic about it. We decided on it, I think, towards the end of last year or the middle, like only a few months after we'd finished Grand Guignol, that seemed like that was the next thing to do. And the same thing occurred this year because we've already decided what we're going to do next year, but we'll get to that in a bit.
All right, DS. So what inspired your story for this one?
Oh, geez. So, I have always been a Vincent Price fan, and I was trying to get some inspiration for what I was going to do for Hammer Studios, and I ended up rewatching the first two Dr. Phibes movies, and the second one feels like it comes to this natural conclusion, but there was this little gap that I thought I found, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to take that and just drag this whole thing out into a third story, and I just kind of rolled with it from there, and taking inspiration from those first two movies is I found super easy, because Vincent Price's character, Dr. Phibes, in that was so much larger than life in just about every way, and being able to write in Vincent Price's voice was just an absolute wonderful experience. It just flowed from there.
So tell us a little bit about the story.
Sure. So the second one ends. The second movie kind of ends where you think that Dr. Phibes has completely won. He's found his wife and his way to resurrect her. But the gap that I found there was that most of these spells and rituals and everything that he's used in the past have been very literal, right? And so instead of resurrecting his wife and having her come back as one would expect someone comes back, her body is resurrected, but her soul is not returned to it, and she's basically catatonic. So he has to find and go through the next ritualistic steps that will bring her soul back from the afterlife. And this brings him to an ancient Sumerian temple where he has to start making sacrifices in order to appease those gods and allow her soul to come back to her body. Meanwhile, he has someone chasing him who is pretty upset about some of the things that had happened in a previous movie, and she wants her revenge on him, and it's the conflict between these two that allows the story to unfold.
All right, so Tony, how about you? What inspired your offering?
My story is called A Mate for Frankenstein, and the three Frankenstein, I think there was 3 Frankenstein films that Hammer did, and they are odd in the sense that the monster looked completely different every time. They were 3 different monsters. I don't believe that they were allowed to use the basically the universal look. I don't believe they were allowed to use that. So the monsters are always different, and that interested me because I know they weren't supposed to be the same monster every time. So, but the main influence was the look and feel of Hammer films as a whole. And A Mate for Frankenstein, a man and woman decide that they want to go and destroy the castle, the big scary castle up on the hill, for everything that it represents. At this point in the story, the Baron has been dead for a while, and they want to remove this blemish from their village. So they decide to hike up to the village. They get there. They meet a couple characters. Things aren't necessarily what they seem. But yeah, so I really wanted to capture this Gothic kind of feel, the big mansion up on the hill. I wanted horse-drawn carriages, people lurking around corners, hidden staircases, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so the Frankenstein trilogy through Hammer really influenced me, and I wanted to cram as much as possible into that story.
So what are you trying to hit with this particular story with your take on Frankenstein and the monster?
It has more to deal with if there's an underlying theme. It's basically erasing, basically legacy erasure. Like some people feel that if there's evil if at any point there was evil in the world, that it need not be spoken of ever again. Just erase it. And that's the impetus for these characters. They at one point this monster came down from the hills and wreaked havoc in the village, and even though historically the monster has been misunderstood, and ultimately caused the death of people, and it's this stain on the village. And so basically it's them trying to erase that. I really wanted to lean into that. It's not, it's not like an allegory for, oh, they're tearing down statues kind of thing. It's literally just, it's basically people wanting to move on, and the easiest way to move on is to destroy what has controlled them for so long. But yeah, that's the main point, is basically moving past a horrible event and trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the driving point. There's for a short story, there's a lot of themes happening, but that's the main one, and the evil that people perpetrate upon each other.
Yeah, the worst monsters are always the people. So, John, how about you?
Hey,
what inspired this one for you?
well, I obviously had watched a number of Hammer films in my time, but I've watched a bunch of other things. So I went back and watched a few more recently to say, what am I looking for? What is the essence here? And as soon as I started watching The Reptile, I saw like the dark lighting and the lush landscape, like all filled with close plants, creating a claustrophobia right off the bat, and this, like as they said, gothic manor house type thing. I like immediately the story started forming in my brain, and then I went on from there to figure out, who's here, why are they here, and basically the story begins with this down and out character Donald, who has basically been bouncing around dead end jobs and things, and finally got this letter from a lawyer. He had no idea what's going on there. Finds out that his uncle, who he had barely talked to in ages, had passed away, and so he inherited the place where he lived, this estate, if you will. And he goes to find that it's way out in the country, and far from everything, and the place is completely inundated with it's like he knows that his uncle lived there 2 weeks before, but he gets there and it's completely covered in plants. Like, how is this possible? Was he a shut-in? Not according to the people he knew in town. And we find out that up the hill, just next door, is this mansion again, that's completely covered in plants. It has giant greenhouses attached to the side of it, like someone had just been building like the Hill House, like, but there's just, oh, here's some more over here, and it's just been growing. The house itself has been expanding to house all these other types of plants that wouldn't do so well outside, but the whole grounds are covered with tall bushes and strangled statues that have been totally overwhelmed. And so you have this kind of atmosphere of like the world just taking itself back from humanity, kind of thing. And then he gets into a conflict with the woman who lives in the house, and they have their back and forth, and he ends up, she sends him a letter saying, oh, we've started off on the wrong foot, why don't you come see us? And then things go even farther downhill from there. But yeah, basically he thinks he has his chance, and then he basically gets deeper and deeper into this mess.
So DS, I'll start with you on this particular question. One of the things that it's not only about how it applies to this story and how it applies to it, but just the writing horror overall. Because when we write within given genres, it's not only about the tropes and the expectations, but it's about why do we as writers use particular genres, particular ideas, particular tropes, why those stories appeal to us. What do you think so for you, what is it about the appeal of horror? What is it about storytelling as horror that really is powerful for you?
So for me, I think that horror holds this kind of unique place where you can explore more dark, more kind of horrible, for lack of a better word, themes, more raw emotions that can come up from terrible events. I think a lot of what I like to write about is real trauma that exists, but casting it in a supernatural or larger than life scary thing to help both the reader or myself or whatever to help process it, right? And I think that's kind of a unique place that horror holds. If you try to, write about something painful, something sad or whatever, and you're casting it in a drama type of story, you're not gonna get exciting themes. You're not gonna get over the top themes. You're going to be writing fairly literally, right? But with horror, you can take those themes and wrap them in something bigger, wrap them in something that's more than just the trauma, right? And you can make it into a more exciting, at least for me, kind of story. And that's kind of been my approach for most of this time. Although, to be fair, I will say that was not at all what Dr. Fives was about. That was just fun.
I wish Wally would have let you keep the original title.
Vibes in with Dr. Fiveson.
Yeah.
If you
in there somewhere,
at because I as part of the issues layout, I did full movie posters for each one of the stories, because that kind of was part of the wraparound story that I did. But for each one of the movie posters, there's a bogus MPAA rating that's next to a rating at R or PG or whatever I decided. And for the Dr. Fives one, it says R, and it says major vibes in with Dr. Fiveson throughout in the little box where it usually says like violence and strong sexual content and all that stuff or whatever. So it made it into the issue. I couldn't not let it just go by the way.
Had to be it.
So eagle-eyed readers will catch it. Not eagle-eyed. It's pretty blatant, but
yeah. Well,
yeah.
Tony, how about you? For especially doing horror and comedy horror, because and while I know a lot of people in that space, I've written some of it myself. What is it for you about the blend of comedy and horror?
Oh wow, I don't even know. So the
trauma is funny.
It is. So I should preface this with A Made for Frankenstein isn't really funny. That one is I wrote playing it serious up until the end. There's a kind of like a twist ending where I kind of just throw in an absurd kind of twist that I don't think hopefully I didn't lead anybody to figuring out the twist. It's a weird little thing, but so yeah, I didn't really do the horror comedy bit in A Made for Frankenstein, but I have 2 books so far, and didn't even plan to do a trilogy, but somehow that happened because authors always have to do trilogies. I don't know why. My very first book was Lamb of God, and it is about a lamb who comes down from heaven and has to help stop pretty much the end of the world. Satanic forces have been released, and this angelic lamb who has Jedi powers. I guess that's the easiest. He can control minds. He can shoot lasers and quotes the Bible. So it's wild, and it was. Then I did the sequel, which is pretty much a sequel thematically more than a direct sequel, about a group of friends on a private island, and a killer in a frog costume shows up and starts taking them out one by one. And oddly, this killer has Jedi-like powers. He can leap real high, and he can disappear from one place and appear in another. He can control people's minds. So there's those kind of things tied together to sort of make it like a spiritual sequel. It does set up the third book, which will tie the two books together completely. But to answer the question, like, why horror comedy? I don't know. I'm pretty snarky, and I wish I had some. I wish I had some deep, like, psychological answer as to why. But I think that I just like horror, and I like comedy, and I like to break up the horror with jokes. And in the first book, it was very, I say, like it's hard to write sight gags, but if that was possible, it's more of like physical humor, which is hard to do. A lot of pop culture references, characters being very snarky. Second one's, I toned it down a little bit, but I just like the idea of being afraid one moment and then laughing your ass off the second moment. That's really what it boils down to. It's not, I don't have some deep, meaningful answer for you on why horror comedy, other than I think it's like peanut butter and jelly. They just work together.
As you were talking, sorry, I was reminded of last year's Grand Guignol, because one of the things they did in the original theater back in the early 1900s was to do this kind of super visceral, like, people were fainting in the aisles because blood was, they had all these, mechanisms and stuff like that to make it look like they were actually killing people, blood shooting places, body parts falling to the floor and things. But they would do that, and they'd get people all heated up, and then they'd have a little palate cleanser type thing, which was usually something a little bit funny and silly. And so we kind of tried to do that in the last annual as well. But it does come back to the kind of, you can't have it hard and heavy all the time. People burn out. So when you're reading it, kind of that idea of having it be like, oh my God, and then be like, okay. And, and that kind of like clears your brain out a little bit so you can get the next hit in.
I will say it does create an issue with readers who are not, who aren't familiar with horror comedy, because they expect the characters to behave like normal people. But in like a horror comedy, they could be in a horrific situation, then turn around and just like crack a joke, and people will be like, that's not realistic. They would not stop to crack a joke. And I'm just like, well, it's fiction. It's not real. I don't know.
If you put me into most of those situations, the smart ass comes out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it is a dual-edged sword. You have people who love horror, you have people who love comedy, and then when you put them together, they're just like, no, that doesn't work that way. You can't be scared and laugh, or laugh and then be scared. But there's like comedy horror, like even like the Evil Dead, from the Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, some of the best examples of horror comedy. Tucker and Dale versus Evil. There's even some old like black and white films that leaned into the comedy with the horror, or at least like comedy and supernatural elements. So it's been around for a long time. Yeah. It's just hard to do.
John, how about you? What is it about horror for you?
Well, I think there's a lot of real horror in the world, and sometimes it's easier to kind of take the real stuff when you have this, like, oh, this is, 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 kind of thing. In real life, oh, there's war over here, people getting hurt over there, drugs and stuff. But then, again, kind of like you need a palate cleanser. But also this kind of like, if this is a 10, and we show you a 10 with people getting, in Saw, body parts cut off, or being stuck in a concertina wire room where you have to like crawl through it to get out kind of thing, or some other totally horrific thing. It's kind of one of those, well, this other thing doesn't seem so bad anymore, which isn't to say it's not bad, but you have this kind of like, a shift of your frame of reference, I think. And so, some things you read to escape, like fantasy or romance, people are like, oh, I wish I was there. In horror, quite often you definitely are glad you weren't there. Right.
So, Wally, I'm gonna loop back around to you. What is it for you about horror, and the reason you even wanted to pull together the magazine, the publications?
Well, my history with horror films goes way back to, I think, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I distinctly remember watching television with my parents at the time, and the quality feature film that was on was a Roger Corman film.
Who just passed?
Roger Corman or Larry? No, it was Larry Cohen, and it was the film entitled "It's Alive," about the mutant babies that were where their mothers, because of their proximity to a nuclear power plant, were born with razor-sharp claws and went on a rampage. And then later on, as I ended up seeing Alien at 8 and Night of the Living Dead at 12, and so on and so forth. And so I was exposed to what other people would consider, completely frightening, terrifying movies that would, they might watch once in a while. These were those films became kind of a matter of course for me. And coupled with the vivid imagination I was both blessed and cursed with, it became like a natural sort of extension for me to go into those genres. The thing with horror, I find that makes it easier for me to write, and especially to explore the things like Dan was mentioning before, like those traumas and those things that we experience in real life. Is that when you approach the writing of the story, it's almost like you're already in a state of a kind of exaggerated hyperbole, where the characters and the plot devices and the narrative of any given story are already going to or sure to hit some point or some stage where they're not likely to occur in anyone's day-to-day life, and then from there going up to the crazy and the ridiculous. And so drawing upon, because we've been talking about our Grand Guignol stories, I go back to the first feature that appeared in a double feature magazine, and it was called Gary Spivey Has Foreseen This. And it was a little bit of horror and a little bit of science fiction, but it had a little bit of the absurd attached to it. And I knew that I could get away with it in the context that I was setting it in. So Gary Spivey is actually a real person. He has a big giant white afro, and he appears on, C, D level daytime talk shows where he talks about, crystals and healing and good vibes and all that stuff or whatever. And he's, more or less kind of like a huckster type of guy. But in my fictional world, I envisioned Gary Spivey as a prognosticator of the future. And the future that he predicts for the world is nothing but dire. The apocalypse happens here, China invades the United States. This is when they drop the bomb. This is when things turn into, Mad Max landscape, et cetera, et cetera. And Gary Spivey's, in real life and in the story's appearance, is such that any rational human being would dismiss anything that he had to say just out of hand and just say, well, this guy's a crackpot and whatever. Obviously whatever, something went wrong at some point in his life where he decided to, dress himself like an albino microphone. But I thought how crazy it would be if somebody like that was actually, a prophet of doom and knew what was going to happen, and nobody listened to him just because of his appearance. I think in the horror genre, you can get away with doing something like that and not sounding immediately ridiculous. The ideas that you can come up with within the genre are feasible, or at least feasible at the start. And then as they develop, sometimes they don't work out into something that could be considered like, a compelling story. But most often than not, and especially in the hands of an experienced writer, they could be made into something that not only, can serve the purpose of, processing trauma and setting real life obstacles and things that we deal with as human beings, against a backdrop of just a theater of insanity, where that thing in real life would cause us so much anguish and turmoil, but set against this, whatever, like say something like The Evil Dead or whatever, it's like, yeah, well, that's not really a big deal that my girlfriend dumped me. There's deadites outside the door and I got to really deal with them. That's my real problem right now. And so it kind of allows the reader to get a perspective on those things that they ordinarily might not be able to achieve just from, whatever, going to therapy and just kind of like processing it in like a normal context. And so for me anyways, there's the spectrum of things that can be done within the genre, where you can have comedy horror and you can turn it into something like, based off of slapstick. And then you can, really make it a serious, thoughtful approach at a given subject or topic that, through the lens of a scary film or a scary story, takes on a new perspective. I had just read a piece on the film Midsommar that pointed something out to me, pointed up like a facet of how the film was constructed that I didn't really see. And a lot of it had to do with how people are indoctrinated into a cult and the step-by-step and systematic way that cults operate in first selecting, targeting potential people to pull into the cult, what the cult would like achieve by bringing this person in, and how they go about, more or less brainwashing that particular individual into their, whatever their philosophy. And the film was so effective that a majority of the reviews and a majority of the reactions to Midsommar were basically along the lines of, good for her. I'm glad that she let her boyfriend, burn to death in that temple. It's really, she found her family and she got past her trauma. There's nothing okay with anything that transpired in that film, just because it was that day and everybody was wearing kind of like bright clothing and smiling and, whatever. That didn't make anything that occurred any less horrible. That cult murdered 3-4 of her friends pretty brutally. And somehow we've all just decided to go along with it and give it a pass because of the context that, our main character, she got past that trauma in the beginning. That stuff at the beginning, that was horrifying. And horror can do that. And that's one of the things that I really, really appreciate about it. The one thing that I can't stand about a good lot of the content that is being produced in the genre is when it's done from a kind of a cynical perspective, where you have, podcasts and movies where it's just, 4 or 5 guys going out to the woods with, fake knives and blood and, semi-attractive girls, and they do this whole thing where it's like a killer chases these people around, and it's done without, it's constructed and done without a real love and appreciation for what the genre can do. And I think that's kind of like what holds the genre back from being recognized as more legitimate, so to speak. So anyways, that's my long-winded answer.
So what's next for Ascendant?
So double feature number 6 is tentatively titled Super Soldier. So issue number 5 was John McColley's featured issue, and that was a 50s sci-fi, late 50s, early 60s sci-fi themed issue, complete with all the camp and schlock and completely ridiculous plot and stories that went along with that kind of like subset. But Super Soldier is firmly set in those early 80s, mid 80s, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren kind of super 80s and super cheesy type of action science fiction films. And we have 2 new writers that are coming on board. One of the things that has made Double Feature go and last as long as it has and maintained its vitality for so long is the fact that we bring in new writers and we bring in new people constantly, and we try to. Double Feature is unique in that we basically give them, a playground to do whatever they want, and nothing is, sort of out of bounds within, obviously within reason, but in the context of like B movies and Double Feature and stuff like that, there's really no limit to what anyone can really, put forth. So there's that. And then for the remainder of the year, it's we have a number of publications coming out. The sequel to The Ascendant, the novel I published last year, entitled Crimson Mirror, is going to be released in September, and that is that's going to be a doozy, as some people might describe it. Others would probably ask me to either see a priest or a psychiatrist once they finished it. So that is in September, and then in October, Tony is releasing his first novel with Ascendant entitled Frayed. He could speak more to the plot of that particular work. In November, I'm releasing another novel because I just simply can't take a break and just relax and enjoy life for a while. And that novel is called Pandora, and that's kind of a my own spin on like those evil child films like The Bad Seed and Damien and such. In December, DS is releasing his first novel. That's entitled Barrett's Bog, and again, I'll let him speak to that. But that is that's going to be another great book. And then in January, Lucien Lebeau and Michael Strong, who couldn't make it today, are collaborating together to produce their first publication as a writing team. I think it's going to be a series, and it's entitled The Devil's Memoirs. So Ascendant has a full schedule ahead of it, and check us out.
Where can they find you, Wally? Website, social media, all that kind of good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So it's ascendantpublishing.com. We spell it with an E, ascendant. So it's like the adjective form of the word, as our work is basically intended to bring the reader to a new level of understanding or a higher level of consciousness. It sounds cool too. So ASCENDENT publishing.com.
DS, where can we find you? Website, social media, and what other stuff do you want to tell everybody about to go pick up?
Sure. So I'm certainly featured on the Ascendant website. I'm pretty active on Instagram, DS Vernon Horror, and I have a novella that came out called Peripheral. People can check that out. And as mentioned, end of the year, I'm working on Barrett's Bog, which is, I'm not going to give too much away from that right now, but it's it's more personal trauma made into horror. So let's all enjoy that.
Tony, how about you? Where can everybody find you?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't even know the handles on half my social media accounts. If they go to anthony-harrington.com, they will have links to my socials. On Facebook, I'm author Anthony Harrington. It's on Threads as well. I don't even remember what my Twitter handle is.
Good, Tony. Really prepared. Great job.
I don't. I'm not like a social media I like playing around on social media and joking around. I don't use it for marketing. I don't use it for much. Y'all had such like good solid answers for all your questions, and I'm just like, I'm read horror comedy. And then Wally's saying that Ascendant is supposed to lift the readers like to a new plane, and I'm like, I write dick jokes. So it basically author Anthony Harrington on Facebook, and then my other socials are just on my website at anthony-harrington.com. Don't expect much when you go there. It's really just it's nothing. Kind of suck.
Jeez, man.
So John, where can we find you?
I am on a number of social media. I've got the TikTok and X, or Twitter, if you will, Facebook, a little bit of Instagram. I haven't gotten over there very much, but I almost always use John A. McColley. I'm the fourth John McColley in my line, and I have other Johns in my family, so it's just like gotta identify. Just gotta do it. I have my first. Oh, you can't do it with that. Okay, here we go. My first book, in actual paperback form, came out in February from Ascendant. The Weight of Darkness. It's a historical fiction / horror paranormal story, and there will be other ones later on related to that. But I'm also working on some other novellas and things like that. But that'll be coming up over the next year or two, hopefully. But yeah, social media is again, kind of like Tony said, I play around with it, try to interact with people, and have fun with it. But the extent of my advertising there is basically just every once in a while something came up. Oh, I published this thing. Yeah, maybe come look at it. But I also have a page on the Ascendant site, and Tony will have a page on the Ascendant site as soon as he sends us the information to put up there. Some fiction write-ups. Haha.
Shots fired.
Damn.
You're correct.
Shots fired.
I made one for Paul the other day, so.
Well, it's time to go stack up those to-be-read piles. And until next time, I'm Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.